One. Welcome back to the next coding with me in Chapter 2. We've already set up a basic web page with the standard 11 lines of basic HTML coding. Now we're going to be modifying this a little more so that we can actually see a few of these items we talked about in the presentations in real life. So the first thing I want to show you is what the header tags actually do. Not the head tag or a heading tag, but instead an H1 or an H2, etc. So the first thing we want to do is add an H1 tag. If you notice, the first thing I did was on a new line, I typed in H1, of course in triangle brackets, because all tags in HTML have triangle brackets. In this case, we're going to say, I'm a heading. And of course, because we're good developers, we'll go ahead and close it with the proper pairing. If you recall from the presentation, if you close it with an H2 or anything like that, or something other than a H1, the browser is not going to know exactly where the H1's ending. So in this case, we're ending it with the proper H1 tag. Because we're good developers, we save often, we test often. In this case, if you notice, the browser doesn't have anything updated because we haven't updated it yet. We do have to manually do that. So let's go ahead and refresh. And if you notice, the H1 automatically appears. The P tag moves down just a bit and it stays the exact same size. If we were to take out the H1 and save, just for a testing environment, you notice that, well, the P tag also has the same formatting as the H1 because, again, the browser doesn't know when the H1 ends. So that's the whole point of a closing tag. All right, below that, we're also going to add another one, so H2 subheading, and let's add another P tag such as I like cats. All right, again, save, make sure the dot goes away. Come back to the browser, refresh, and you notice that our P tag reverts back to its previous size, and the subheading, the H2, is a smaller size than the H1. Once we get into Chapter 12 with CSS, you'll learn exactly how to modify the H1 and the H2s and stuff like that so that it's not just as boring as Times New Roman or the predetermined size that it is. Also, one other thing about coding practices, if you ever have a block level element such as an H1 or a P tag or an H2 or anything else, you want to make sure that everything stays on its own line because just like in the browser, block elements should take up the one line of themselves and the amount of space. So if you do add a secondary heading such as an H2 and say secondary heading, and then you add a P tag with extra information, this is just to take up space. While that may process the exact same way in a browser you're expecting, the problem with this is that it makes it a little hard to debug and run. So if you are going to have block level elements, I would recommend having the block level elements on their same lines. So in this case, line 15 is now line 15 and 16. We put the P tag on its own line and the H2 on its own line. If we're going to add another P tag, we're going to do the same thing and have it on its own line as well. Secondary paragraph. And save. You can put these two on the same line, but again, it gets really hard to determine where things start and where things don't. So instead, I would just put everything on its own line until we get into inline elements. In this case, that would be Chapter 3 when we start getting into the strong tags and the EM tags, because these are inline and therefore they can be within the P tags themselves. All right. Now, you may wonder, well, if things in HTML are supposed to be very specific, can't I just capitalize the tags, such as capital P and capital P? Well, yes, you can. It doesn't do much difference in the browser itself, but it is a bad coding practice because take a look at this. You have a lowercase p, uppercase P, lowercase p, uppercase P. It's not exactly the best thing. So for coding practices, you want to make sure that all of your tags are lowercase. It may look better to you to have uppercase, but it is sort of an industry standard to have lowercase. So in this case, you save, you refresh. That doesn't do much difference in the browser. Additionally, if you are to add multiple spaces like we discussed in the presentation, the browser does not care. You can see that the same space between secondary paragraph only has one space. If we were to change that to something else just to make sure that we have a refresh, we save, we go back, we see the X appears, but the multiple spaces between these two words does not. If we add multiple lines between those two, and we change this to a Q, we save, we refresh, you notice the X changes to a Q, but there's still only one space between the two words. So again, the browser does not care how much extra space you put between it, it'll narrow it down to just the minimum. That is, of course, unless you have no space, in which case it's going to take it as a literal translation. Because again, computers are smart, but they're not that smart. All right. We've already talked about the paragraphs. Next thing we're going to talk about is, of course, line breaks. Now, a line break in HTML is forcing a new line versus just a paragraph tag. Like we discussed in the presentation, these two right here are paragraph tags, in which case the space around them is automatically formatted. If we take away this p tag and take away this p tag, you notice that both take up the same line. But if we actually move this and put in a line break space, a line break, and a line break is just BR. You can either have BR by itself, you can have BR with a trailing slash, or you can have the BR and space. All three are perfectly acceptable. Basically what they do is, again, they force a line break. So now this is just to take up space, and secondary paragraph are one and the same. They are still in the same p tag, but you have forced a line break with this BR right here. Again, if you take a look at the difference between the standard p tag and a line break, you notice that the p tag, of course, has the spacing around it, whereas the line break did not. The line break just says, hey, I'm forcing a line break here. Why would you ever use a line break versus just standard browser width and element spacing? Well, if we take this line right here and just copy and paste it a whole bunch of times, copy, paste, 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 paste. All right, we refresh, and we notice that all these words take up the amount of space that is available in the browser itself. We resize the browser, and, well, the browser just does the work for us. Which is all nice and dandy, but if you want to have something that works with space, especially once you get into CSS, you want to insert the line breaks where necessary. So that way you know exactly that the line break here will be there no matter how wide or how tall the browser gets. The line break will still be there regardless. All right. Talked about nesting. We can't get into nesting until chapter 3. All right, comments. With comments, as discussed before, comments are ignored by the browser. Comments are started with the triangle, the triangle bracket, the exclamation point, and 2 dashes. And anything inside the triangle brackets is ignored. If you notice, brackets itself actually marks comments as gray. That's perfectly fine. Again, the browser does not care. The browser does not process comments. If you take a look at source code, you'll notice that the comment is there so people can see it, but the browser itself does not do anything with it because it doesn't know what to do with it. It's a comment. So again, these comments can do anything that you want. If you have tags inside them, you have tags that do a lot of things, you have another HTML tag, whatever, the browser does not care. Anything inside of these comment brackets is not processed by the browser. Even if you have multiple lines. Blank space. The browser, again, we saved, we come back here, we refresh, it does not care. We take a look at the source code, and as you can see that it's right here, a bunch of space, but again, the browser doesn't really care. Sometimes you may see a little kind of ASCII art, such as a bunny or a dog or a duck or something in here. Again, the browser doesn't care, it's just going to process it as a comment. So again, if we say this section starts the description of what we're talking about. You can do that if you want. Again, browser does not care. So you can add anything you want in comments, you can leave as many comments as you want, you can put comments just about anywhere that you want. The only exceptions are the first line. The first line should always be a doc type, because if you don't have a doc type, again, the browser and the processing format doesn't know what to do. So the doc type should always be first, and the HTML tag should always be second. You can put comments after the HTML tag, but I wouldn't recommend this. Because once you're done with the HTML tag, hopefully you shouldn't need anything else. Will this still validate and process? Well, you'll just have to validate and find out. But overall, it's just a bad practice to have anything after your last HTML tag. All right. That's pretty much it for this video. The next video, we're going to be taking a look at live validation and error checking, along with trying to figure out exactly the common issue behind some very odd errors. So if you have any questions, please let me know either via email or Twitter, and hopefully I'll get back to you with a solution to your problem, or we can work it through together. Until then,